Good afternoon, everybody. Mark Bradley here. Today, we're just going to talk about incentive programs. I always get a ton of email and requests on LinkedIn about this topic, and thought it would be something to spend some time on, since many of us have some extra time at home to meet online like this. So I'll jump right into it. So the average landscape company really, I think, kind of looks like this. We've got, all of our usual expenses, and all of you who are using the budgeting software are well in tune with your own ratios. But we've got our field wages and tax, which takes up, kind of 25 to 30% of our revenue. Our equipment generally, kind of 10 to 15% of revenue. Materials kind of ranges depending on your work mix, but as much as 30%. Then we've got, less in subcontracting and rentals, but in general, there are exceptions. And then overhead is typically between 20 and 30%. And I think for many of us, the biggest opportunity to pay ourselves as owners and our employees more money comes from expanding the revenue and holding the overhead. So we become more profitable when we do a little bit more volume and we keep our overhead fixed. And the way I think to go about doing that is to become more efficient. We can't just keep on charging more money. We need to be more efficient than our competitors. And I guess what this incentive program boils down to is, how do we get our employees to think like entrepreneurs and create more revenue in the same amount of time? That can only happen through efficient work habits. And I think putting an incentive program in place that kind of ties that way of thinking into the day-to-day decision making always helps. So in a more efficient company, really what happens is we just become a little bit more efficient in everything that we do. Our unbilled time often shrinks, and our profitability goes up as a result. So often, I think when people aren't getting the profit that they're hoping for, they think that they need to increase the price. And sometimes that is the case, and our estimating software is designed specifically to mark up your costs to recover your overhead. And that's why it's so important that we incorporated the budgeting software into the product. It's so that we know for sure that you're marking your work up to recover your overhead and make the profit that you expected. So ultimately, being efficient means eliminating the waste at every stage of the work. And in order to do that properly, I think you need to engage your field staff. They need to feel obligated to eliminate waste. And I think we can accomplish that by doing a few things, one of which is introducing a little bit more entrepreneurial method of paying out a bonus. So eliminating waste, it kind of comes in the inches, I always kind of say. It's really doing everything more efficiently on the job site. And in order to do that, we definitely need to do some training. We've got some great resources in the systems library for forms and documents relating to continuous improvement, waste elimination, the 5S system, if you're not familiar with that. But in addition to that, I think, just making the crews aware of what their crew goals are for the season, and then sharing the estimated hours on every project is kind of the key to, creating an incentive program like this. And that's really why Element Time was developed the way it was, with the estimated versus actual hours being so prominent, and us having sort of the virtual attaboy scenario where we can let people know that they're doing well, or let them know that maybe things are running a bit behind automatically with the gamification introduced last year. So let's just look at crew budgets. Often companies have a budget, they've started using LMN, and they haven't really gotten to the point of creating a budget for each crew. And I think that's kind of one of the most important things to do in the business, because it's great to have an overarching budget, but how are we going to break it down to make sure that everybody in the company is kind of contributing, so that at the end of the day we roll up into, you know, that overall budget. Now, whether you're, you know, 2 crews, 3 crews, 5 crews, or 50, I think if you break it down on a crew by crew level and give each foreman a goal, it makes it a lot easier for them to understand the business, for you to understand the business and sort of break things up into smaller pieces, and then to measure what success really looks like. And ultimately, that's what creates the framework for the bonus system. So we're just using some sample numbers here for today. So we're saying a 3-man install crew can produce 380,000. If the company ratio was 27% for labor, that would represent 102,000. The equipment costs, if they're set at 13%, would represent 50,000. Now, sometimes in companies, the equipment cost per crew varies from the company overarching budget. And that happens on every level here, because if you've got maintenance and you've got design build, definitely the field labor wages, equipment, and material ratios will vary by crew. It's not going to always roll up to be the same number as the company budget. So it's important that you budget for each crew so that you can set up their actual costs and give them goals. For example, if you had a foreman who said, I can do more revenue, but I really need my own skid steer and excavator, that would be fine, but you need to put the cost of those pieces of equipment in their budget so that they are contributing to the cost of that equipment and you're assessing the profitability of that crew. Same would hold true for managing materials. And of course, overhead, what we're really doing is assigning the same ratio to that crew as the division they work in. So if you have a maintenance and an install division and they have different overhead ratios, which is common, we would apply the overhead ratio from the division they work in. So in this case, it's 20%. So we don't itemize overhead in crew budgets. We just simply assign a dollar amount that equals the percentage of that division. So the net profit for this crew would be planned at 37,000 if it was 10%. And you know, often people ask questions in workshops, and again, I get a lot of people reaching out through LinkedIn saying, does it make sense for me to add a second crew or a third crew? Or sometimes it's, you know, they've got 5 crews and they're thinking they want to grow the business. At what point do they add a crew? And what I've always kind of said is the way to decide whether or not it's time to add a crew really relies on your capacity for that crew. In other words, if you've got 5 crews and they're all sold out and it's time to add another crew, that's great. But how much revenue does that crew need to produce in order to justify adding a crew? And in this case, it's very easy to figure out, because you say, well, if another crew is going to cost me $102,000, I need to generate another 380 in revenue. So that's the deciding factor on whether or not it's time to add a crew. If I can't generate that additional revenue, then I'm probably better to stick with the number of crews I have and maybe just adjust the way we're doing things, or just hold off on growth and just focus on efficiency and profitability. And, you know, unfortunately, the situation we're in here this year, I think most are going to be having to face the fact that they're going to be focused heavily on efficiency and a little bit less on growth. So how do these incentives work? Ultimately, we have sales, we have waste, we have wages, and we have profit. And these are just sort of general components. This isn't replacing a budget. Sometimes people get a little bit confused by that. This is, we have revenue coming in the door. We have lots of unbilled time, and we have waste in terms of doing work twice, or doing warranty work, or running around looking for materials, or forgetting tools at the yard, or stopping at the gas station to get a coffee or hit the washroom. We waste all kinds of time doing things that we're not actually generating revenue by doing. And that's really what waste is. So we have our expense of wages, and then we have profit. So simple categories. So we've got that income, we've got the time and revenue lost to mistakes and just general waste. We've got our wages and profit. So pretty simple kind of framework here. Now, the ideal scenario is really to take the waste and turn it into more revenue, provide more revenue that can be spent on wages, because it's a constant as a percentage. So as sales go up, wages go up, and of course profit goes up. And with that increased profit, we're going to have more rewards for the owners and the key staff. And so this is just sort of a really simple overview. I'm going to get into the nuts and bolts next. So just picture we've got our waste. When we eliminate the waste, sales go up, wages go up, and profit goes up. Pretty simple concept. This is an easy way to explain it to staff. We can take the waste, turn it into more profit and more wages. So ultimately, we know our numbers because we have budgets. And if you create a crew budget for each crew, that really defines the incentive program. So how many staff do I need to grow by in order to create 200K in revenue? This is just a common question that people come along and ask. So if I want to grow and I'm going to top up my sales goal by 200,000, how am I going to decide how much I'm going to spend on labor or how many people I need? Often we get this question, or we hear people say, I've got an opportunity to hire a new foreman from another company, but I'm not sure if I can keep them busy, and I'm not sure if I can afford them. This is the way of looking at that through and through. If I want to create a $50,000 position, I need to generate 200,000 in revenue. It's really that simple. And I think when you start to look at the business that way, your mind changes and you focus a lot less on top line growth and a lot more on bottom line profit, which I think is most important. We're not interested in just growing revenue and reducing profits along with it. We want to continuously grow while maintaining the same profit, which means we have to be really aware of things like this. So if my field labor budget's 25%, if my budget tells me that, then it allows me to do all kinds of things in the business. It allows me to set sales goals or production goals for my crews, and it allows me to set the wages and create the baseline for a system like this. So if I had a new crew that was going to cost me $65,000, I would know that I have a production goal for that crew of 260, because I use the 25% factor to reverse engineer the production revenue that crew needs to produce. This really allows me to build a sustainable model to scale up the business. So for every crew I add, I stay with this same model, and I just continuously add revenue and expenses in the correct sort of balance. And this avoids the age-old problem where you've heard probably people say, and I've heard consultants say this, unfortunately, that there's points in your business where you just can't be profitable. There's these peaks and valleys and these plateaus where there's optimal sizes to be. And I'm not really a big believer in that. I personally think that certainly there might be some small plateaus along the way, but in general, if you keep your ratios in check all along, then you should be able to be profitable as you add 1 crew, 2 crew, 3 crew, and more. There shouldn't be really a point where you're just not profitable because your overhead is out of whack. You should always keep it in line. So I'm a big believer in paying a little bit more. I think if your base wage is a little better than your competitors, your staff tend to not look over the fence as much. Now, I'm not saying that the base wage itself has to be way more. I think having that opportunity to have the base wage with a good upside is a good way to do this. And in the meantime, as you're starting to grow and as people are starting to grow and they haven't yet proven themselves, I think it's also very valuable to rely on the bonus system to top them up. In other words, if they're running a crew today that has, relatively low revenue, I can't pay them top dollar. But if this year goes extremely well and they exceed their goals, then I can pay them more from the bonus. And I think when you share that with foremen and key people, that becomes motivating enough for them to not look over the fence. But this all said, I do think it's worth paying a little bit more per hour. So this little chart here just kind of suggests that, we could pay somebody $20 an hour and we would need to do 66,000 in revenue, or we could pay 28 and we'd need to do 72,000 in revenue. But the key point here is overhead stays stable. And if that $28 an hour person can actually produce more work by working 10% faster and being a little bit more efficient in the way that they think and operate, then we can actually make more profit off of that person, providing we're pricing the work right and they are actually working more efficient. So that all sounds easy, and you're probably saying, well, that's pretty theoretical, and it is. Where I think it actually happens is in the slides to come. So the point here is the lower paid foreman will produce less profit than the higher paid foreman if they're more efficient and if they're motivated to get more work done in a day. Simple concept. Not saying it's automatic. Certainly, I wouldn't say that we could just pay anybody $28 an hour and they're going to produce more profit. There's a lot more to it than that. That's what we're going to kind of talk about next. So the bonus incentive system we're going to talk about here today is kind of a two-part system. And I want to start by saying this is something that you will probably introduce in your business, and it will possibly run its course. And what I mean by that is, if today you have 5 foremen who all make $25 or $30 an hour, and you'd like to see them all get to the point where they make $35 or $40 an hour, you can't just offer them that wage increase overnight and expect everything to change on its own. But what you can do is say, hey, I'll pay you a fair wage today, or a little better than the going rate, as I just suggested, and I'll put a bonus system in place that's linked to your productivity. But what you'll notice is once this succeeds and each crew is producing a lot more revenue, you'll probably find there's a ceiling in terms of exceeding the goals. And I'll explain that more clearly in a minute here. But just sort of understand for now that the sales-based incentive will probably run its course. In my business, it was about a 5-year curve where I could set bonuses based on sales, but then once everybody and the company was producing sort of as much revenue as possible out of each crew, there isn't really an opportunity to exceed the goal anymore. So then you're really just at the point where you're paying top dollar wages with a small incentive off to the side, which I'll show you in a few minutes. So the bonus incentive program here is meant for sort of a transition. If you have no bonus system today, or you have one that's not working, and you don't have crew awareness of budgets and project hours, this is a good way to transition your company. So here's how it works. If I look at last year's sales target by division, I say my design build department did $1 million, my maintenance did 500,000. Next up, I say my field labor ratio in design builds 25%. In maintenance, it's 32%. When I set my goals for my crews, back to what I said earlier, I basically add up the wages for the crew, I total it, I say my crew wage is 80,000. And at the end of the day, I'm going to set the goal based on what the cost of the crew is. So if the foreman comes along and says, oh yeah, you know what, last year I made X and this year I want to make Y, I can make that decision just purely based on what the sales goal is going to be for this year. So I can say, sure, I can give you a raise, and now the crew wage is, instead of 80,000, it's going to cost 90. And I'm confident that I can recover that based on the productivity and the goals that I'm going to set for the crew. Not just looking at it as, if I pay this foreman an additional 10,000, I'm going to take that 10,000 out of profit. I don't want to ever look at it that way. I want to always look at it as though I can pay 10,000 more if they get more work done. And that's the conversation that I want to have with the foreman. So sometimes I might say, hey, listen, I can't give it to you up front. I'm not going to pay it each week. But at the end of the year, if you produce, then I'll pay more money. And that's what this system is about. So it could be upfront or it could be at the end of the year. Just keep that in mind. So I've got a total crew wage of $90,000 now. That's the cost of the crew. I know that the field labor ratio is 25%. So I'm going to set my sales goal at 360. That's just simple math in this case. Obviously 4 times 90,000. Because of the 25% factor. But if it's a wonky number like 27.7%, you're going to mathematically calculate your production goal and come up with a matching ratio. So where does this bonus come from? Often, this is kind of the question that comes up most often. Does bonus come out of my profit if I'm a business owner? And my answer is no, it shouldn't come out of profit. It should come out of super profit. And I'm going to show you what that means. So ultimately, we've got a budget, which is 360,000 for the crew. I know that I've got 90,000 set aside to pay them. I've got my equipment budgeted for the crew and my materials budgeted based on historical numbers. I know that I've assigned a fair chunk of my overhead to this crew using my overhead ratio for the division. And now I've got a net profit of 27,000 planned according to the budget. But if they do more sales, if that crew becomes more efficient and they get more work done each day, they don't forget their tools, they always have their materials waiting, they've always gotten the information they need in advance, they're using the 4 o'clock floor to drive out waste every day of the year. When that happens, they get a little bit more work done each day, and that ends up hitting the revenue line. And so what happens is sales goes up. The wages didn't go up because they got more work done in less time. The equipment costs didn't go up. Again, they're just getting more work done each day. The material costs are going to go up a bit because they're putting more material in the ground every day. And ultimately, overhead doesn't change. And that's where the biggest opportunity is for both the employees and the owner to gain in more revenue for themselves through a bonus incentive program. So the profitability of this crew jumps from 27,000 to 69,000 purely because we got more work done every hour of the day, every day of the year. So that opportunity is pretty huge in the sense that even after buying some extra material, there's an additional 42,000 left over. and we've got a few things we can do with that. So we beat the sales goal by 60,000. The reason there's a bonus is because overhead was paid for when we hit the target, which was 360. So if the bonus, if the overhead was 20%, we've got some additional profit to share. My own feeling is the foreman, particularly on smaller crews, should get somewhere between 50 and 70% of that bonus. Because in the end, I think your foremen really do make or break the profitability of the company. I always say they carry your wallet. Every decision that the foreman makes, from the time they show up to the time they leave, and quite possibly even while they're at home, impacts the profitability of your company. The people that work for them contribute, but they're led by that foreman. The foreman needs to be paid in a little bit more entrepreneurial manner, or needs to be paid at the point where they're sort of at the ceiling of their potential, based on the fact that the crew just can't do more work because they're already uber efficient. This model kind of helps you get from step 1 to step 5. So as I said, this incentive program you'll find will run its course in your company. Once the foreman is producing at 95% capacity, you can't continue to bonus them based on going beyond, because there is no more beyond, and that's important to know. So this works incredibly well for companies who are trying to transition from, maybe having 60 or 70% efficiency to 95% efficiency. So we're going to give some bonus to the office staff because they work harder to make things more efficient as well. Designers, salespeople, accounting, anybody that's contributing to the business. And then the field labor are going to get a component as well. Now, the way we share the reward is we take the additional profit that was gained from exceeding the goal. We take the bonus pool out, and there's still additional profit left over for the company, which is great. So the numbers look something like this. So a typical crew without a lot of efficiency is going to hit that 380 maybe. They go over the goal by a bit. But a really efficient crew, an entrepreneurial foreman, I think will get a lot more work done in a day. I always look back to my early days doing landscape work, and it meant the world to me to finish my 1,000 square foot paver driveway in a day, because I knew that I could make $5,000 or $6,000 that day by getting it done. So I would break my back to make it happen. It's hard to recreate that when you're paying people by the hour, because I think, unfortunately, it's just human nature. If you're paying them by the hour and the job takes longer, they make more money. But if you're paying them by the hour with an incentive and it takes longer, they lose money. So what we want to do is align the way that we make money between the crew and the owners, so that we both make more money when the jobs go faster and without any quality errors. So in the super crew model, we get more work done every day, and the impact on the bottom line is we've got a lot more money to share in terms of rewards for both the owner and the staff. So this little diagram kind of clarifies things. If you're confused, hopefully this kind of summarizes what we've talked about. So the crew goal is 360,000. The company overhead's 25%. The company profit was set to 15. This is a simple example. If the goal was 360 and sometime in, let's say, October, we hit the goal of 360,000, something pretty special happens that day. What happens is we recovered our overhead. We've paid for our overhead, because if all year we got our jobs done on time and we hit our sales goal of 360, on that day, our overhead is paid for. And that's where the bonus potential really kicks in, is if we go beyond our sales goal and we've already paid off overhead, what used to be overhead becomes profit. So this is what actually happens. So if our goal was 360 and we hit 420, we exceeded the goal by $60,000, our crew bonus becomes 15,000, because what used to be overhead at 25% is now completely free money, because we're not paying any more overhead. It's already been paid. So just on that little sort of bump from 360 to 420, which could be, 1, 2, or 3 more projects each year, depending on the size of jobs you do, that is going to create a crew bonus of $15,000. So it's pretty significant. And I think when the crew starts to understand that this is how they earn more money over time, they start to look at driving out waste in the same way as the owners. Now, the other model, which we can blend the two, so that first model is a scenario where we can't necessarily give you a big raise at the start of the year, but if you can hit your goal and outperform it, we can give you more money at the end of the year. This bonus system here is a similar model, but what we're saying is we're going to set your bonus at the start of the year based on a percentage of wage. And you could even use both models side by side. Now, this system is really simple. We're going to take the wage and we're going to say the foreman makes $30 an hour. They get 2,000 hours a year. They make $60,000, and their incentive rate, their bonus rate, is 10%. So their incentive is $6,000, and it's planned. We know that we're going to give this foreman $6,000 if they hit their goal. So if they hit the 360, then they get the $6,000 because they hit their goal. They paid for all of their they got all their jobs done on time, let's say, and they deserve the 6,000. So you may create your own criteria based around safety and other things. I'm a believer that warranty work for that crew should be deducted from the incentive. In other words, if they had $8,000 worth of rework on something that was obviously just deficient work, I would deduct that from the total, because that builds the quality into the system. But just keeping it simple here, the foreman has 6,000 set aside. The laborer has an incentive rate of 5%, so we have 2,000 set aside for them. If they also now not only went beyond their goal of, oh, I see an error here, sorry. The crew production goal is saying 500 here. The crew production goal was actually 360. If they went beyond the 360 and they hit the 460 mark, then there's an additional incentive that we're going to pay as well, which was the system I just talked about. So their effective bonus would be 7,200 because they got their production, they reached their production goal and got their incentive rate, plus they exceeded it and got to share in the additional profit when we hit break even and went beyond. So that's kind of the system. Now, how do we do this? It's great to roll out a crew budget, and it's really great to incentivize people that way, but some training has to go along with it. We have in the systems library, there's lots of forms and documents and training tools to really talk about waste elimination and productivity. And I'm going to talk about sort of 6 pillars that I used in my business that worked really well. So first off, materials have to be managed incredibly well. Most of the waste in our business comes from waiting for material deliveries or not getting the information related to materials fast enough. And it's usually a combination of the two. The second major thing, equipment and tools. So often we don't listen to our field staff. They're telling us that we need these tools to become more efficient, but we don't want to listen because we see the tools as expenses. But we have to start to really see the tools as levers for profitability. If we can get the right tools in the right hands of well-trained staff, we can quite often increase productivity by 30, 40, 50%, in some cases even double productivity. So we should always be considering efficiency tools. And this always comes from having an open mind and working with the crews to decide how to do that, but also budgeting on a crew by crew basis and putting their equipment in their budget so that you can be sure that it's going to be expensed properly, but used to grow profit in the right areas. So a lot of opportunity on equipment. Planning, how are we going to plan our jobs so that we can execute efficiently once we get there, rather than creating the plan at the last minute? It's so common in the business for people to show up on the job in the morning and then decide what tools and equipment they need. The 4 o'clock 4, if you're not using the app yet, it's completely free. That solves this problem completely. If your crews use the 4 o'clock 4 every day, you're forcing planning. It just becomes second nature. Goals. Your goals need to be broken down not only from a crew budget, but then on a job by job basis. The reason LMN Time has the estimated versus actual hours with the gamification feature that sort of lets them know each day if they're on time or not, that's there to keep people aware of what success looks like on a daily basis. Communication. We know that things don't go to plan in this business. There's so many variables between the weather, the customer expectations, design changes, scope changes. There's just so many things that pop up. We have to be aware of what's changing, and we have to be able to kind of make those adjustments quickly, because when we wait or we stop or we let the flow get interrupted, the expenses keep on going and the revenue stops. And that's, I think, where most companies suffer when it comes to waste. We have to be able to adjust quickly. Using technology to really create real-time communication and decision making. Things that are as simple as taking a picture and uploading it through LMN Time, or even just taking a picture and texting it to get a quick answer instead of waiting for the owner or a manager to show up on the job site to make a decision. This day and age, we shouldn't ever have to do that. Whether it's FaceTime or pictures, we should be able to kind of get that decision really quickly. We shouldn't really have to wait for somebody to show up. And then ultimately, training the staff to think this way is most important. And what I mean by that is, let's talk about where we waste time, and let's identify it, let's share it, let's get the crews to actually identify it, and then let's create improvements to eliminate that waste. And it's everywhere in our businesses. And once it becomes something that you identify, it kind of becomes fun to try to eliminate it. And I think you can do this in a way where it's quite positive and the crews feel motivated and sort of obligated to eliminate waste. And it does require some training. And again, the tools are in the systems library to do this. So we've got things like loading and unloading trailers and forgetting tools, moving materials around job sites multiple times, or staging things in the wrong areas, going to gas stations and extended breaks, smoking and texting and phone calls and social media, and then of course warranty. The list is much longer than this. This is just a sample, but just 7 improvements like this with a billable rate of $45 an hour and these really minimal hours per week adds up to be an incredible amount of money on every crew when you factor your charge out rate. when you're producing work instead of wasting time doing these things, you produce a lot more revenue. And I think once people start to see it that way, and when their pay is connected to producing more revenue, these things start to get minimized pretty quick, particularly if you actually have the staff identify where the waste is in the operation. So again, the forms library, there's all kinds of tools here under lean production systems and many other areas, but under lean production systems, you'll notice there's some training tools specific to elimination of waste. And then of course, there's all kinds of other things in here that would assist as well in the operations area. But take the time to download some of these forms, and you know, they're on Word, they're easy to modify, add your logo, and create some training programs that are directed at waste elimination. There's no point in creating an incentive program without tying efficiency into the program. That's the combination that you want. As always, you can check out the Facebook group anytime to talk to other users. LinkedIn as well. You can reach me on LinkedIn anytime if you've got questions. Happy to answer you there. And some exciting news we've got coming up. The customer portal will be out this week, and that will give you all kinds of opportunity to interact differently with your customers. Might be handy given the nature of what's happening with the outbreak right now, but definitely it's going to change the way you do billing, the way you'll handle your customer requests. It's going to allow you to collect payments online and really automate payments particularly for maintenance and contract deposits and milestone deposits on design build projects. It really kind of takes the time out of your day where you're out manually collecting. And we think this will have a big impact on efficiency, a big impact on owners' time and managers' time in the companies, and really take you into what we believe is today's expectation on the consumer end of things. Consumers aren't expecting to have a meeting and write a check anymore. It's kind of, things have changed, as we all know. So this allows you to manage your customers in a more automated way and really improve the customer experience and give them what they really expect, which is a little bit more of a virtual relationship. Other things, resources that we have available, you probably are aware, but I'll mention again. Element Academy, we've built everything online over the past 18 months that we offer in class. So you can take any course that we offer in class online. Those are certification courses. You take the course and then you can do a test to become certified in LMN. It's great for career development, whether you're an employee or an owner. Definitely a great way to expand your knowledge of the software, and a lot of it is business based. And then of course we always have the one-on-one support. We've introduced virtual budgeting workshops recently to replace our in-class workshops, and of course you're on a webinar here today. So thanks again for joining me today. We've got about 10 minutes here for questions, and I'm sure there's probably a few, because bonuses are not an easy topic, and certainly I'll try to answer any questions in as much detail as possible.
Mark, I can go ahead, and the first question, let me just scroll up here. So instead of an overall landscaping budget, should I create a crew budget and apply budget and actual to that?
Sorry, Abby, I didn't catch that.
I apologize. Can you hear me now, Mark?
Yeah.
Okay, great. The first question here is there a feature for crew budget in LMN?
Yeah, yes, it's just in the budgeting software, the same as your where you build your crew budget, or sorry, your company budget. You just build crew budgets using the same template. The big difference is rather than completing a full overhead budget, you just insert a $1 amount to match your ratio for that division. So you build a budget just the same as you would for your company with sales, labor, equipment, materials, any subcontractors that they might be managing, and then overhead, you're just inserting a dollar amount.
Fantastic. Second question here. What's the best way in LMN to track revenue by crew?
The best way would definitely be when you're assigning the work to each crew, and at the end of the project, when you finish the job, if let's say you've got a design job, build job that has 4 or 5 major work areas, and let's say you have a crew that does pools and a crew that does planting and a crew that does hardscape paving and crew that does natural stone, and they all contribute to the same job. I think the best way to do that is to create a rolling spreadsheet for each crew separate from LMN, and you just assign the revenue from each major work area as they go through the year. And the way to do that is to gather that information from LMN time, because they clock in and out of each work area for the job. So as the jobs wrap up, you can assess if the hours were on target or not in LMN, and if they were on target, then assign that revenue to the crew as a contributing project to the revenue goal.
Great. Okay, we've got another question here. How would you create an incentive program for a maintenance crew, particularly considering that the contracts don't mature at the same time? The crew will be completing annual contracts throughout the calendar year.
So my feeling on maintenance incentive programs is that they should be heavily based around enhancements or sort of add-on services. So every company bids a little bit differently or sells their work a little bit differently, and often crews are working on many different types of contracts, in the sense that, you know, they may do some that are bid at a base monthly with additional options. They may be working on some where it's just fixed price for the year. They may be working on some where it's hourly. And that's a challenge for the foreman to sort of keep track of what success looks like. So I think the reason LMN has the hours broken down for every service when they clock in and out, to let them know if they're doing well, that kind of keeps them on track, particularly on maintenance contracts over the course of the year, so they know how they're trending on hours on any given project, so that they don't start to run over. So if they have an estate property with 500 hours built into the price for the season, and there is no extras throughout the year, they can see how they're doing, so they don't, you know, kind of blow the budget on hours. So part one is they self-manage the estimated versus actual hours, because they have that data in their hands using LMN time. Now, where does bonus come from, or where do they have opportunity to create more revenue? Generally, that's in them making suggestions for incentives or add-on services. So, you know, some companies don't want their field foreman making those recommendations directly with owners. They've got account managers for that. And regardless of who's going to do it, I think the crew is most aware of what should be done to make the property as beautiful as it can be. And that may be recommending mulch or more planting or infill planting, or maybe identifying hardscape features that need repairs, pruning requirements, tree removals, all these things that allow us to generate more revenue. And quite frankly, in the heat of summer, that should be when that, rather than working a 25-hour week, maybe that's when that foreman says, you know what, we could probably really top up mulch at most of the properties. And if in your contract mix you already have mulch priced per bag or per yard, and the customers have already opted in for that service, that's a great opportunity for them to really pump revenue in an otherwise quiet time. But I think when your foremen are not motivated to increase sales, they don't come back with those recommendations, because there's really no benefit to them other than they're going to have to work a little bit harder each week. So I think there's a lot of opportunity with maintenance companies specifically to do better with an incentive program, because typically the profitability on those add-on services is a lot higher than it is on the base contract. And I think when you put an incentive program in place that drives that awareness at the field crew leader level, that's where you get more results, I think, in producing that extra revenue. When it's top down, when it's always coming from management, I think it's difficult, because they are not in the field and they can't see all of those opportunities as quickly or as readily, and they can't action them as quickly as the field crews either.
Great. And I do have time for one more question. What's the best way in LMN to track non-productive time? Should it be scheduled as non-billable? Is there a best productivity spreadsheet?
Well, you could, there's a few ways to do that. You can create a work area called windshield time, travel time, or downtime. I've seen people call them different things. And when there is calculated waste, in other words, it's something that you can't avoid, you clock in and out of that so that you can track that cost. We always suggest having one account set up specifically for warranty and rework, so that you can track that on a crew by crew basis and run a report for each crew at the end of the year to see how much money was spent doing warranty work. I even suggest doing warranty hardscape and warranty softscape, because often we can't really hold our employees responsible for dead plants. But in addition, windshield time is a good one. If you're not clear on how many hours per day they're spending driving from site to site, I think it's a good one to add. Now, keep in mind, the way the LMN system is designed is we have a calculated waste built into the labor rates. So I don't consider driving from job to job waste. I just want to know how many hours or what percentage of the day we spend doing that, so that we can apply a markup to our labor to accommodate for that. And in your labor rate calculator in the estimating catalog, it prompts you to enter a rate, and that could be 10%, 20%, 30%, or in some cases more of the day driving from site to site to site. But generally speaking, I think if you just add a downtime component that they can clock into if they encounter downtime, then at least you can track it.
That's great, Mark. That was the last question for today.
Okay, great. Well, thanks a lot, everybody. And I'll be here same time, same place next week if you'd like to join again. Thanks.